I was really interested to see your background. I was introduced by Ruth, who gave me a little bit of précis, and your career has obviously gone from one extreme to another, starting in the Navy, which isn't
Yeah.
the classic career choice for an interior designer.
So it
And
was the Navy were, I mean, they turned up at my school by accident. So
right,
I was at this bare pit of a comprehensive school in Stirling in Scotland.
yeah,
And every day I was running the gauntlet of the various factions in the school.
yeah,
And I arrived at, although my mother is Scottish and my father is Irish, I arrived at this school in Stirling having been with them at school in England where they'd lived, you know. So
yeah.
I came in with an English accent and I was this target. Um,
That must have been awful.
yeah, it was the second year of the school, and children are merciless, you know. And you know, I came in, didn't know anyone because it was just everyone had formed their little groups,
Yeah,
and it was, yeah, it was quite a harsh baptism. Anyway, the school rolled on a few years. I My mother put me in the wrong year, so I was early finishing my education at 16, my hires and things that they do in Scotland.
yeah.
And the Navy officer, an officer recruitment team for the Royal Navy pitched up unannounced. And I had nothing to do, and the headmasters said, go and watch their presentation. But they were lost. They were supposed to be going to a boys' private school called Strathallan in north of Stirling. But
Right.
this is before Google Maps, and they they turned up at Stirling High School. So I went to watch this thing, and there were five of us. They went to watch this presentation, and the Navy was so embarrassed. They invited all five of us on this Navy acquaint trip. So we were flown by our RAF Hercules to Lisbon in Portugal, then got back on an aircraft carrier and were taken back to Rosyth. So there was this 3 day officer acquaint trip. And,
Wow.
you know, 3 months before I'd never even thought about the Royal Navy or not, you know, let alone thought about being an officer. And at the end of the trip, I was a bit prone to flattery because someone was being nice to me. And they said you'd make a bloody good naval officer. And so, so I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And so there was this bizarre situation where I had to sit something called the Admiralty Interview Board. And my father was a policeman, and he was friends with a man called David Alexander who ran the Scottish Police College. And he'd been a Marine, and he coached me for my Admiralty Interview Board. And so I had the insight of this man who was a major general into how to handle this interview. And he saw me every week for about 5 months, and then I had the interview. And of course, I sailed through this thing, and I
Yeah.
won a scholarship for university. So I went to the Navy for a year, and then they sent me to Edinburgh University, and I was supposed to study cartography and geography, and I switched out a couple of subjects to history of architecture and history of art
Right. Okay. You're
without
starting to
telling.
realign yourself there, were you, in terms
Yeah,
of,
exactly. And my mother had an antiques business, so as a kid, I was always going to markets and, you know, shops and things, and I always had a kind of an interest in that. And I also, the other thing that stimulates a young mind is you can make money with these things. So I would go and buy a black silver spoon and clean it up and sell it for, you know, make a few pounds on it,
yeah.
and it sort of motivated me as a young boy to sort of look at decorative things and ways of you know, monetizing that at the beginning of my life, you know, as on my meager pocket money. But yeah, it was the Navy was the sort of saved me in a way. First of all, for it saved me from the bear pit,
Yeah.
and then it also educated me because we not only were they paying for my university, but every summer, winter holiday, I would be sent to my affiliate ship, and my ship was out in the Pacific. So they didn't make any difference about that. And so I'd flown out to Hong Kong. I was in Australia, New Zealand, the Solomon Islands, Cook Islands, Pitcairn, you name it. I went Indonesia, New Guinea, Thailand, all of that. And so it's this sort of 17, 18, 19-year old, 20-year old. I was going through all of this amazing places, and
Yeah.
I was I was just thrilled with this whole experience. And I didn't pay much attention to my Navy exams and sort of didn't do very well at those, but spent a lot of time looking at these amazing cultures and experiencing traveling to places that most people never get to see.
Extraordinary kind of sliding doors moment, isn't it? There's some guy in Stirling who's in some dead end job that could have been a naval officer that
Right, exactly.
stepped into their shoes. What an
It's
experience.
so I think that, you know, I firmly believe the universe alive that you I mean, everyone says it's very popular now, but I believe your thoughts manifest your reality and how you
Yes.
perceive the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
And so those things aligned, and it was an extraordinary experience. And I met all kinds of characters and things, because when you go as a ship into a port, you're representing the UK,
Yeah.
and suddenly you meet either the sometimes the head of state, sometimes depending on the size of the country, sometimes the local governor, whoever it is, and then all the port captains and all these characters. And it taught me how to, you're basically thrown in the deep end, and you have to talk to these people
Yeah.
and keep them on side. So
Were you
that
in
taught
like
me,
one of those white uniforms with the
yeah,
epaulets and all that stuff?
ice cream suit, they call it. Yeah. And so, yeah, that and having to change 3 times a day in a hot climate, which is also, you have these, one of the things people don't know about naval ships is there are Chinese laundrymen on board. There's like a whole little sub department of the ship, but there's 4 or 5, and it traditionally was Chinese laundrymen from Hong Kong, and they occupied a sort of laundry at the rear, usually at the rear of the ship, and you had to pay your they got you because they had the monopoly on cleaning the shirts and ironing them and everything,
Yeah.
because there's
Yeah.
no competition. So you were sort of in debt to they call them the Dobie man, the
Yes.
laundry man. So
Yes.
you were,
Adobe. Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So my biggest bill was paying laundry bills at sea,
Look
because you,
smart. Yeah.
yeah.
It's amazing story. What an experience. And so I guess I was thinking about, a naval officer. What did that give you skills that you now draw on today in your
Yeah.
experience? I'm
I
sure.
mean, I hadn't realized what it was doing, but it was teaching you management, leadership. I mean, yes, we're told that's what they're teaching you, but I hadn't thought of it in the way that it would be adapted into a non-military environment. But of course, it gives you confidence, and you learn. Some of our work was quite distressing and traumatic, and
Yeah.
later in life, I had PTSD therapy because I was reliving some of the things I'd seen. But it teaches you to keep a level head and be calm.
Mm.
And, as long as nobody dies, you can usually fix a situation.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and so when people panic on site and they say, "Oh, the curtain's too long," or
Yeah.
there's a splot of paint on the parquet floor, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
it doesn't really
Got a sense of
phase me.
perspective
Yeah,
then.
put it in proportion. Yeah, keep
Yeah.
it in
That's
perspective. But
great. I think everyone should have that opportunity. I remember when they had the first Gulf War, we were in London and they were talking about whether they were going to conscript people, and
right.
I think we were a bit old, only just, though. But we were I was looking, in a flat with my mate, and they were talking about conscription. And then they cut away to the Italian Air Force base, which was in some sandy region, locally. They all sat there in their kind of cool gear and their shades, and they had a chef cooking pasta, it was like being on a holiday. Well, that doesn't look too bad. There's the sort of the glamour of the uniform and the role and that sort of thing, and the travel, I suppose. I
I
suppose
think I think Armani designed the military uniform for Italy,
they were so they look really
and
amazing, yeah. And you think,
and they
oh,
also,
who
I
did
worked
that?
with some
Yeah,
Italians, and they had a friend who said that bloody Italians, they've got comedy beards and uniform, and and it's like they always look smarter than us, but they
yeah,
were always immaculately groomed and
yeah,
immaculately dressed, and it was, yeah, part of the theatre of working in NATO. You'd meet all the characters from the different
yeah.
countries and
What
things.
an
So
experience. How did you get out of that and then start your business?
yeah, so when I mean, I'm a gay man, and at the time it was still a sort of strange dynamic to be gay in the armed
Yeah,
forces. And so I wasn't happy about hiding who I was, and couldn't be who I was, because who I am, because it was something that was frowned upon. And even when the law changed, it was still not entirely clear how people would be treated and so on. It used to be a court-martial offence
yes,
if you were found out. So I came through my education at Edinburgh, and then went back to the fleet, and I found that my personal life was suffering because I was, at sea, and I wasn't allowed to tell anyone
yeah,
about and so that was quite hard for me as well, because I ended up having to leave before I should have done by resigning. They didn't know until after I'd left that I'm gay. And I told them afterwards, but there was this whole procedure, and they took the minute you announce you're leaving, they take a pretty dim view of you.
Mm.
And so that was quite a traumatic time for me, because and I also, I knew that I wanted to do something creative. And when everyone was at sea reading Jane's Defence Weekly, I was reading The World of Interiors. So how they didn't know I was gay, I don't know.
How did you
But
get it out there? How did you get them delivered? Obviously delivered.
BFPO, British Forces Post Office.
Okay. Fair.
And
Yeah.
so I would be reading these things, and there was an article by a man called Michael Player, who'd worked for John Fowler of Colefax and Fowler,
Yeah.
and he had this beautiful house in Scotland near where my parents lived. And I wrote to him and I said, I'm a 23-year-old naval officer and I'd like to become a designer, an interior designer. And of course, this old queen couldn't believe his luck
Yeah.
and invited me for lunch on my next leave. So I drove to this beautiful house. It was in an amazing park in Aberdeenshire, and when I arrived, he was standing at the top of the steps in a lime green suit with a pink neckerchief and a yellow handkerchief in his top pocket and a dachshund under his left. And he was standing at the top of these stone stairs, and he looked down and he said, "You may have gathered by now that I'm queer." And I said, "Oh no, the thought hadn't crossed my mind." And then he said, "Are you?" And I was absolutely scared to death and said, "No, I'm not." And he looked down, and the Dachshund looked down, and I thought, this is all going to go horribly wrong. And I said, "Is it a handicap in this profession if you're not?" And he said, "It might help if you learned, dear." Uh, and that was my introduction to the world of interior design. And he then interviewed me for about 2 hours, and on the back of that, he satisfied himself, and he wrote to two designers that he knew. One was Imogen Taylor, who is still alive at the age of in her 90s, who was the head of Colefax and Fowler, and he wrote to a woman called Sylvia Lawson Johnston, who had a practice in Aberdeenshire. And both of them gave me a job. The latter one first. After I left the Navy, I got this job on £50 a week and was the trainee designer. But I was also driving a truck for one of the electrical stores, and I was acting, and I was working in a bar, and it was like a whole strange period of my life of about a year, where I'd come out of the safety and structure and security of the Navy, and suddenly I was a barman, a truck driver, an actor, and learning the ropes a bit with the design on this small salary. So
Did you feel comfortable with that sort of freedom, or I mean, because the Navy is very rigorous and rigid sort of structure, and you basically, as I understand it, in those kind of environments, don't really have to think much about your routine, or
no, yeah,
someone's feeding you, someone's cleaning your room, someone maybe not cleaning your room, but
yeah.
laundry. You've been told where to go. To then be in that environment where you've suddenly got to make everything happen. How did you cope with that?
Well, suddenly the it was a bit of a step down, of course, to ego, because as a lieutenant in the Navy, there were stewards that looked after you, and there were people who, there was a sort of rank structure, and people called you sir, and there was whole,
Yeah.
and then when you're working in a bar, I was the flunky, I was the
Yeah.
pot wash, I was cleaning tables, I was, and the Navy are very good at training officers. They make them clean the bilges in the ship and the sewage tanks and stuff before they become officers. Before you become an officer, you have to be able to do anything that you'd ask the men to do, and women.
Yes. Yeah.
So you would be, you have they and they know that the rates in the ship know that the officers have all done the work that they've done. They've painted the ship, they've cleaned the ship, they've done all the things that you. So from that point of view, I graduated from doing that, and then I was thrown backwards again. So suddenly cleaning toilets in a bar, I was, all of those things. And the Navy gave you the resilience to deal with that. And I kind of was focused, and I knew I wanted to do what I'm doing now. So I just kind of knuckled down and got on with it.
Mm.
And delivering washing machines for curries across Aberdeenshire, where it's 60 miles to take this sort of bit of white goods off to some farmhouse in the back of Beyond or whatever it was, and then getting there and then having to carry the bloody thing down a path for a quarter of a mile or whatever it was. But it was a good time. I acted at a theatre in Aberdeen, which was cool during a sort of festival, and there was a stage where I thought maybe I should become an actor. And but then I kind of then the lady in London, Imogen Taylor, who I'd written to, wrote to me, and I said, was I in London? And I invented a trip. I said, yeah, I'm going to be in London next week. And I made the trip down, and she interviewed me, and she satisfied herself that she would make me a trainee director at Colefax and Fowler.
Yeah.
And I think that was because of the naval experience and what I'd started to do embryonically with Sylvia, who was the designer in Aberdeen that I worked with.
Yeah. So she's
So
recognized all those skills then.
yeah, it was nice that she took me under her wing. There was another man that I was working for there who was there was the time of I don't know. I was let go because I didn't sleep with my intermediate boss, so how about that? So there was somebody who was in charge of me who was basically being inappropriate, and I kept sort of turning this
Yeah.
down, the approaches down. And he said, we're going to have to let you go because you're not cooperating, which of course nowadays you wouldn't. But I went to see the finance director and said, you know, I've just been fired for not cooperating. And
Yes.
he looked at me and said, not again. And I said, he's what do you want? And I said, well, my job back. So that's not happening. And he gave me a check for 3 months' salary. And then another one of the directors who disliked the person that I'd worked for employed me as a freelance on the Monday. So on the Friday, I got sacked and was given 3 months' pay. And then on the Monday, I was employed as a freelance. But that situation was kind of untenable. So I ended up
Yeah.
going back into education for a year. And I had a small bursary, and I was working again in bars. And I did stuff with a man called Paul Dyson, who was doing events and exhibitions and parties. And I would be working until 4 in the morning, setting up an exhibition, and then going to school. And the Harry Krishnas fed me in Camden. I would go to lunch there every day, and because my £35 a week didn't run very far,
Yeah.
and so that was another lesson as well. I had holes in my shoes, and it was a real, that was a period of about a year and a bit, and in London, and again, it was something that taught you more resilience. And then I met this man called David Laws. And this friend of mine said, I don't know if I should introduce you to him or not because he's quite a tough character. And I thought, there's nothing he can throw at me that I can't
Yeah.
deal with.
Yeah.
And so I met this man, and he was very talented, but he was a narcissist. He was very tough, and he did everything he possibly could to trip me up for a period of about 7 years when I worked for him. I was his assistant,
Yeah.
but he had amazing clients, and we worked all over the world. I worked in Greece, in Italy, in France, in the Middle East, and the Far East, and he took me with him everywhere. And the clients started getting to know me, and they liked me, and then eventually I took the business over. And so I changed the name from David Laws Designs Limited to Oliver Laws. And people used to think there was a son called Oliver.
Yeah.
um, and I had to explain that it was the problem with having two Christian names for my
Yes. Can be confusing.
yeah. But yeah, he was at the time I've oscillated between appreciating him and hating him.
Yeah.
And he was very, very tough on me. And at one stage I almost jumped ship. I was offered a job with Ralph Lauren in New York, working with their home collection as a sort of in a directorial role. And I almost left. And then it came to a stage where we had to part company, and he promised he was going to retire several years before he actually did, and he didn't. And then eventually he did, and there was this sort of separation of the ways, and he retained a client or two, and then he retired completely, and he died at about 2015, 14, I think. And then I took it all over and ran it. But I also learned some hard lessons in business because I knew nothing about running a business. And when I took on the lease from him, I didn't know about this thing called dilapidations,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
which I knew nothing about that. And we came to the end of the lease. I thought, good, I got rid of this expensive office. We can move somewhere smaller or different. And this man came to us and said, you need to pay us £350,000 to leave the office. And I said, well, that'll sink me. And then I said to them, why? And they said, you've got to put the office back to the way it was 25 years ago. And I said, well, it's always been like this. And they said, no, it hasn't. I said, well, prove it. They couldn't find the plans. So I
Oh,
didn't. So that taught me another lesson, was just because some man in a grey suit comes and asks you for £350,000, it doesn't mean you have to give it to
that's quite a
him.
lot of delapse, isn't it? 350
Yeah,
grand's worth. But
yeah, yeah.
yeah, the that's amazing. So, I mean, the way in which you describe that whole journey, it's kind of seamless and well organized. But was that how you was that
No,
you were
it
looking
was a
at, or you
yeah,
know,
it was yeah. I mean, it was a painful. It was like a divorce in a way, because
yeah,
he didn't really want to go,
yeah,
but also he didn't like that the clients liked me, and
yes,
which he'd set the situation up. He said he was exiting and he wanted out and he wanted to retire and all
yeah,
that. But that also he hollowed out the business. There was no capital left at the time. There was a kind of government scheme where you could cash out, I think, up to £1 million in capital
right,
without tax by if you got rid of your shares.
yeah,
So there was literally nothing left, and he he exited, and then I had the dilapidations experience. Um, but it was, yeah, it taught me again about business, I suppose. And the I was naive and young when I took it on. I was 28,
yeah,
and I was like, yeah, I'll take over this lease. And what did I know about these things that people do? It was a very it was something I wasn't expecting and didn't know about, but I guess I now know about these things. And
yes. What
um,
did you? I mean, as opposed to just setting up by yourself,
mhm,
taking over the business, what were the benefits of that? I mean, you've obviously got the back catalogue and
mhm.
the clients,
Yeah.
the name, but you'd already starting to establish yourself as part of that. Was that what you were thinking, that it was a natural continuation of what you were doing?
I think that what it did was it was a springboard,
Yeah.
and it got me to where I was going faster. So, he used to say, when I was your age, I hadn't even started in the business.
Mm.
And he was right, and things had changed, and it was a different life for him. I actually really appreciate him now. And I still, when I say my appreciations every day, I appreciate David.
Yeah.
And, what he did was actually very generous in a way. He didn't have to hand on the business, he could have closed it.
Yeah.
But his ego kept it, and that's, I guess, why I kept his name as well, because it felt like I'd had to have something to show for the years of servitude and sort of
Yes.
battered down. But I guess the Navy taught me to not take it personally, and then I learned through my own therapy when I was getting treatment for PTSD, and when I was getting my own sort of therapy about relationship dynamics and all of those things.
Mm.
It taught me that just because something comes out of someone's mouth, it doesn't make it mean it's a fact. And it's not about you, it's about them.
Yeah.
And so you don't know that when you're a young thing and you come out and there's people saying mean things, or
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know berating you or whatever it is. But I guess the Navy had given me more resilience than most, because I'd seen the extreme side of that and what can happen in an extreme situation. And so, and in the Navy, that now everyone wants to be congratulated for licking a stamp, but they used to say in the Navy, if we don't say anything, you've done your job.
Yes.
And it's a quite a brutal way of doing things. And now I have to remember, when I to thank and to appraise and all of those things. It's comes naturally now, but
Yeah.
it's something that I didn't have that when I was starting out, because Davy was pretty brutal and the Navy were pretty brutal about these things. But now things change, and people need appreciation and love and affection and all those things, and you need to be able to show it. And
Yes.
that was something I had to sort of learn in my partly in therapy, partly through life experience, and showing appreciation to people gives you the best rewards. And so
No, it does. I mean, that resonates to me in a way that the change that we've had since, I don't know, we're talking about the 80s, 70s, 80s to now, we'd have critiques with tutors where they would just rip you apart, and there's a power play there, isn't there? And there's a brutalness of it. And in our lecturing, you know, these days, it's a much softer, you know,
yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, I as I David was very, very brutal about the way he he spoke about things, and he was very tough with the assistants. And
Yeah.
when I accepted a directorship, which was in the, yeah, I mean, I was still late 20s, and I started taking things over, and then retired from the period between 2012 and 2015. But one of the things I said to him is, you can't talk to the staff like that. You cannot do that. And if you do that, I can't accept a directorship, because one day we're going to get sued.
Yeah.
And so eventually he mellowed.
Yeah.
He always used to wear a suit to work, and I would wear a jacket and jeans. And he used to tell me off, and then I kind of wore him down. And so he was very much a product of his generation. He was
Yes.
aspirational. He'd come from quite a humble background. And so when he'd had his career, and his big heyday was 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
And then I came along in the late 90s, and there was this sort of, strange junior person who I had an element of confidence from the military bearing, I guess.
Yeah.
But he was very, he didn't know how to deal with me, because I didn't get phased when he shouted at me or burst out crying,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever it was that people would do when he was rude to them. So yeah, it was a lesson. I know that what he was doing was from his own fears and insecurities now, and I know, dealing with those things, that it's part of his journey, and the pain that things that he's suffering, and how he was dealing with his life. He'd had a tough upbringing too. His father was someone who worked in an engineering workshop in Derby,
Yeah.
and here he was dealing with, he did the staterooms at Downing Street for John Major. He was dealing with, quite high profile aristocracy and moneyed people, and was, what's his name? Sorry, I'm having Tony O'Reilly, who, when he was running Heinz and Waterford Wedgwood,
Mm.
David was doing his properties in Pittsburgh and in Ireland and in London. And, that for somebody who came from his background, which was very humble, to be thrust into that world, of course, he was driven by insecurity and all of those things. So, but I didn't know that at the time.
No, I think that's the thing, isn't it? We've seen over the years a real shift in how people become aware of those kind of issues and how they deal with them, and the support and the just the support and understanding that's around the way people are, the
Mhm.
way your brain ticks and the way you behave. And anyone who's done a bit of kind of therapy or coaching will know that, it's not about, like you say, it's not about what they're saying, it's why they're saying it, and it goes deep. And I think times have changed, thank God. It seems much more liberal and
Yeah, but there's also, I think there's a lack of, one of the things I notice is resilience is building resilience is challenging for
yes,
young people, because they've been cosseted in a different kind of way, almost gone in the other extreme. And there's a lack of ability to know how to communicate with, like I often say to the guys in the office, to make a phone call and
yeah,
instead of procrastinating through emails and texts,
yeah.
because it's very easy to delay something or defer something, and by doing it that way, and then you don't have to have actual conversation, but you'll often, the intonation and the inflection in a conversation, text can be misinterpreted.
Well,
And
yeah, I know that. I mean, I say make a call, because as soon as, I mean, you send an email, you ask a question, you got to wait for the question to come back. And then, of course, there's a question to ask straight back, isn't there? If they're on the
yeah,
phone, you can respond immediately. Yeah. But you think it's about confidence of young people, or,
totally.
yeah,
They're scared. We had a lovely guy who worked for me for 2 years, who was a very talented animator, and he'd gone from school to university and had never had real life experience. He was also an only child, and his mother cosseted him.
yeah,
But he comes to the office, and I never forget the first day. I said, could he go to Marks and Spencer's and buy a tray of sandwiches, because we had a contractors meeting. So I gave him a card, and I told him it was over there, and he went off, and he came back an hour later, and he said they didn't have any trays of sandwiches. And I said, well, didn't you just buy some random, buy a mix or
my
something?
God.
And he goes, oh, okay. So he goes off again, and he comes back with a bag of carrot and some hummus. And I said, where are the sandwiches? And he said, I didn't want a sandwich. I just wanted some cash and hummus. And I'm like, they're not for you. And they had sticky labels on the desk saying how to answer the phone, how to take a question, all of those things. So because
Yeah.
it wasn't something that came naturally to, I guess, this generation, because they haven't had that kind of exposure or experience. So yeah, you have teaching basic skills is something that comes, often with employing juniors, and they're talented in other ways. I mean, they can whiz around a computer, or they
Yeah.
can
That, I
do.
mean, I guess, yeah, it's then confronting people with hard truths, isn't it? That like this is what you need to learn, or this is how you need to operate, or
Yeah,
that's not the way to do it.
yeah, and the client is not your enemy. The client's
Yeah.
enabling you to do what you love, hopefully,
Yeah.
if you love what you're doing. And so yeah, it's they there was we had a couple who get resentful when the client demands attention. Well, but that's what they're paying for, you kind
Yes.
of. So so yeah, I'm sorry, you can resent that, but they're paying the bills and your
Yeah.
wage. But
Isn't it?
um,
Funny.
so,
So the back catalogue of David Laws was
mm,
quite, well, did you continued working in that sort of area? Was that the area
yeah,
that you enjoyed, more historic and I don't know how you would describe them, classic
yeah,
buildings? There's a lot of heritage and
yeah.
also kind of high end. Was that?
Luxury. It was a different journey to one I perhaps would have made on my own, but I had to become confident working. There were very senior members of society who'd made vast fortunes, and I won't say the names, but and had collections of art, that I'd seen in museums.
Yeah,
So there was one client who had Liechtenstein's, Renoir, Monet in their drawing room. And well, the Liechtensteins weren't in the drawing room; they were on the staircase. But the Monet, the Renoir, the Manet, all of those things. And when I was 28, 27, 28, I did a course at summer school called Attingham Summer School. And I finally got my company car and all this sort of thing. And I was going off to the summer school for 3 weeks. And the client, who was quite a strong character and had been used to money for, the family had money for generations, and they were big shareholders in a major oil company. And he said the prime minister was coming for dinner at his house, and he wanted me to take a Van Gogh from London to his house in the countryside on the way to my summer school that I was going.
right.
And I said, I cannot carry that painting in my car. And he said, why not? And I'm like, because it's worth this much. I'm not insured. And he said, he said, just put the bloody painting in the car and
Yeah.
come down. So I went into this house. They wrapped it in a blanket, and I was carrying this £5 million object
Yes.
and in the back of my Golf, and there's this thing, and I was thinking, if I have a crash, and of course it was fine,
Yeah.
and now I'm very confident about moving a £5 million painting in my car, but but it's I wasn't
Stick the Liechtenstein on the roof rack. Be fine.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it was literally that was an interesting lesson as well about perception and value and all
Yeah.
of those things. And and it was also about, at that level, he wanted the prime minister to see that painting.
Yes.
and um, and that was all part of the show. So but it was a funny lesson for me, and I pinch myself sometimes because I've been fortunate enough to work with our king on charitable philanthropic projects, and I've also have to work with every tradesman in the building, and I pride myself on treating everyone with equity
Yes.
and
Yeah.
equal value, and appreciating what they do, because if you haven't got the guy who's going to fix the electrics and deal with the plumbing, it doesn't matter if it's the king or not, the project's not going to work and it's going to fail, and you need to be able to call on these people if there's an emergency, and they'll only respond, especially in London where there's many calls on them,
Yeah.
and if they enjoy working with you.
Yes.
And so
Those relationships, isn't it?
yeah, relationship building. And
Yeah. So I was going to come on to the project with the king, but just first, just interested to your thoughts on how you perceived, what you were doing and what your design company represented and how that's shifted from the inheriting the previous version through to your version of it now?
I guess I keep more of a spread. I mean, the projects can be literally a house, an apartment, a boat, a plane, a office, a restaurant, a hotel. And before, David Laws didn't keep much hospitality. He did Wilson's restaurant in
Mm.
St James's. He did work at Claridge's. He did work at the Berkeley, and I took on that mantle. I was also trained by a man called Micheal Inchbald. There was a little period before David where I worked with a man called Micheal Inchbald, who was a famous designer from the 50s, 60s, 70s. And when he retired, I helped him deal with archiving his projects and things as a sort of freelance job. So for me, I think what I like to keep a spread of private to public work. So commercial hospitality work, they PR the crap out of it. Everyone wants to see it. You know, it's out there. Everybody's can see what you've done, and that's a very visible. And you get, you get praise or you don't, but it's a very visible display of your work, and it's a way you can be proud and show off in a way of what you're capable of.
Mm.
Private work often can't be published.
Yeah.
And so people, when I'd finished this project with the Monets and the Manets and the Liechtensteins and all the rest of it, I wasn't allowed to publish it. And here was me, I was 28, 29, 30 doing this project. And my contemporaries were doing, 3-bedroom flats in London or whatever it was. And I wasn't allowed to say anything about it. It was like, he said, my friends will see this house and that'll be what you'll get from it. And I said, what? And that also taught me about validating yourself internally.
Yes.
And not looking for external validation and not dreaming about acclaim. And
Yeah.
and a lot of these awards dinners that people go to, you have to buy a table which costs some enormous amount of money, and you're effectively paying for your prize anyway.
Yeah.
So it's so for me, it taught me some humility again, another lesson which I kept getting on my on my life journey.
Yeah.
And it also taught me to, if I'm proud of what I've done, then that's enough
Yeah.
validation.
Yeah.
So and for me, I love, for me it's a bit like conducting an orchestra. One room could have elements from 40 tradespeople,
Yeah.
and you've got to bring it together into one harmonious whole and make the whole thing make sense and be also. I think the nicest compliment I ever had was when someone walked into a restaurant I worked on, and the restaurant had cost £5 million to fit out. It was a big restaurant, but it was a full fit out with, there was structure and mechanical, electrical, all of that, then the decoration on top.
Mm.
And they walked into the restaurant, which was in a heritage hotel, and they said, "What have you done here?" And I was like, "What the?" But then I thought, actually, it's a compliment, because they think it's always been here.
Yes.
And that was the point. I was trying to make it look like it was an early incarnation that had been redecorated, even though I was creating the bones of it in the interior architecture and then decorating on top.
Yeah.
But I'd achieved what I'd set out to do. And so this friend who said, "What have you done?" was a compliment at the end of the day. So I chose to see it that way. So,
I was thinking about your approach to working in historic buildings, and perhaps we could talk about the King's Lodge project, which is with the Turquoise Mountain Foundation, when you're approaching a building which has already embedded historic character, what's your first step with that? I mean, it sounds like on that other project it was complete strip out and starting from scratch.
Yeah.
But I suppose in that sense, you think, what are you doing? Are you trying to emulate the previous? Where do you situate yourself in that? And I guess there's quite a lot of research involved as well.
For sure. I mean, so you're talking about the Connaught Hotel in London, which I've been involved with now for 15 years. And when I first was approached, they were only going to do a few rooms, and I basically said no, because the hotel was very down at heel. It had been suffered by, generations of. There was a long-term management in the building who'd allowed guests to pay the same rate that they'd paid 20 years before, and of course they'd ignored something called inflation, and the guests were getting this amazing deal, but at the same time the hotel was losing money. And so they came to me and they asked me to look at it. I'd been working at Claridge's, which was the sister hotel, and I thought, I don't want to work there. It's like it's all run down, and
Yeah.
and then they came back and they said, well, actually, we're going to do more of the hotel. And then I said, you need to do all of the hotel. And anyway, with back and forth. And in the end, I ended up being the kind of legacy designer for the whole building. And it's a late 19th century building. It was built in 1897. It's kind of the peak of empire. It's not a period that I'm overly fond of at first because it's 19th century. It's I prefer sort of, less strong lines and things. But anyway, they took me into the project, and I had to think in the style of the hotel and work with it. And that was rearranging their art collection, the furniture collection, opening up the main staircase, which had been filled with fireglass on the sides. So
Oh, yeah.
when you walk in, again, it's a hotel that the Grosvenor Estate came in and said, "What have you done here?" The main staircase was boxed in when I went, and I opened it up. I opened the fire separation zone out to a bigger space, and we had all the balustrading that was missing recarved,
Yeah.
and it feels very authentic to 1897. The main staircase, it was relit. The art was hung in a particular way where there were lots of portraits of women, dogs, and horses. And so when you walk down the grand staircase at the Connaught, you're coming from the sixth floor to the ground floor. There's a portrait of woman, a dog, a horse, the Duke of Connaught, and that repeats when you're going down because they're different periods and it's a collection of art. But I tried to create some kind of system in the hang of the paintings and the art there. And yeah, it using things like block color in a traditional interior makes it feel more contemporary.
Mm.
Using contemporary furniture in a historic interior and some mixing it with contemporary art and stuff starts to make it more relevant. And one of the nicest briefs I've ever had from a client was make this project look like it's been in continuous ownership since it was built,
Yeah.
but reflect my collection and my objects and the things that I love. And so that layering, which gives an integrity, the Connaught has an integrity to it, which I don't think you get in any other hotel in the
Mm.
world, because it feels perhaps there's one in Edinburgh called Prestonfield House, which is owned by someone called Jimmy Thompson, who created an interior over 30 years with his own collection. But the Connaught has an integrity to it. It's been a hotel since the beginning and it's got a collection of things that have also been in the hotel since the beginning. And we've added to that and augmented it and enhanced it and edited, and it's now got a very secure place in London hotellery because it's very much loved by its very loyal clientele.
Yes. So there's that sort of honoring the history, but updating it in a sensitive way. Right.
Yes. So we just did 88 rooms and suites in the hotel, refurbished them. And rather, it finished last week when I hung the last painting in the last suite. And it
Wow.
was all rather unceremonious because we'd been so discreet in doing 5 rooms at a time over 2 years that the guests hadn't noticed. And
Right.
it was rather nice that we were able to do that. And they feel like it was ever thus when they walk into
Always
the
been
suite.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was a wonderful thing to do. But also, again, you got to validate yourself from inside because no one's going to say anything to you. And it's been a nice thing. But you were mentioning about the King's Lodge, which
Yeah.
is
So I'm interested in that, the relationship. Did that come out of this project as part of the brief or
no, I kind of it was me opening my big mouth. So the relationship with Afghanistan started in the hotel about 2007 when I was appointed as lead designer for the Connaught.
Mm.
I was also became friends with Rory Stewart, and the King, the then Prince of Wales, introduced us in 2004, I think.
Right.
And
So you
a
just
friend
said,
of
sorry, just to butt in, you just said the king introduced you to somebody. I mean, that's not the sort of thing that happens on a daily basis, is it? Well, how did that happen?
I I was one of the graduates of the Princess Foundation, so I
Oh,
went
that's
back to the
yes, okay.
education,
So you've got an in.
and I
Yeah.
had to, I guess, but I also done various work. My mother used to beat it into me that I had to put back, and so
Yeah.
I got involved with some of the Prince of Wales's charities and helped secure funding for certain projects and so on. And then I had a friend who'd set up an orphanage for war orphans coming out of Afghanistan into Pakistan, and it was called the Suman Foundation. And I introduced her to Prince of Wales, and we were trying. There was this brainstorming about a way to help in the region, and then Rory wrote his book called The Places in Between, and he volunteered to go out. And a client of mine was very generous and gave some uninhibited funding, and we restored. There was a district in central Kabul called Murad Khani, which was restored. It was about 140 buildings, and that's obviously an ongoing project. There was a huge team from Turquoise Mountain, and they employed a lot of people. And then also City and Guilds, who are an amazing organization, set up an accredited course structure for training the students. And so these artisans that were restoring things, the legacy there, which is wonderful in Afghanistan, is there's now an institute, and it's become the de facto sort of arts and restoration school in the country in Afghanistan. And I'm still going there. I love the country. It's an amazing place. And when I was appointed to work at the Connaught, I thought how wonderful to be able to communicate that aesthetic to a London audience. So the chief executive of the hotel group at the time said, why are you doing an ethnic room in a Mayfair hotel? And I said, well, in the 18th and 19th century, people who lived in these houses would have gone and traveled, and they'd have brought back things from their tours. And we're going to create an Afghan suite at the Connaught. And he said, well, you have to pay for it if it goes wrong.
Right.
So I signed this piece of paper, and then I literally, there was no DHL at the time or any of that stuff. And I managed to convince a friend in the Air Force to stick a pallet on the back of an RAF Hercules plane back to the UK with all the carved wood and everything on it. And it came back to RAF Lynham, and then a team of Irish shop fitters and me went to go and get it, and we installed it. And the suite became popular with the King of Malaysia and the Kings of Leon. I
Right.
used to say that thing, and it became one of the most popular suites in the hotel because we'd opened up the attic and made this wonderful carved paneling, and it's a really wonderful sort of studio space, and that's called the Prince's Lodge. Anyway, 10 years later, I sort of stuck my neck out again and said, can we do another one? And on the opposite side of the corridor was a rather awkward space, and they said you can use that space. And so it took me 4 years to navigate agreeing, getting the ownership to, they'd been an ownership change, and getting the ownership to agree to do what's effectively a very large charitable donation to create this new space. It's not an obvious thing for a hotel to do, because when you take a suite offline, it's revenue. And you have a thing called displacement, which means that all the money you're not earning from that suite is stacking up until you put it back online again. So few hotels will do that. They'll do very fast turnovers. Anyway, the Connaught, Lord love them, they let me do a second run at this. And so the King's Lodge was born, and that involved 140 artisans from every, textile weavers, carpet weavers, stained glass artists, stone carvers, metal carvers, metal workers, wood carvers, everything you can think of in a space. And there were artisans that come from Syria, Jordan, Afghanistan, and it was this wonderful coordinated project which took 4 years from inception to completion. But it's much loved, and it was voted the most romantic hotel suite in London. And again, it's already got a loyal following, and it shows you that if you do something slightly different, it will also pay for itself pretty quickly because
Yes.
the rooms are booked. So that's a nice journey, and the Connaught loved the relationship with Turquoise Mountain, and they took the risk at the beginning to do the first suite, and that gave the connectivity for Turquoise Mountain to go on to work with other brands, luxury brands and high street brands, to produce carpets and jewelry and illustrations and wood carving and all of those things. And it started their creative journey with a commercial arrangement, which is supporting a group of artisans in developing countries, post-conflict, post-disaster
That's a
areas.
lovely
And
story. I mean, in terms of the design process, how did you translate your kind of ideas of the spatial arrangement and the decoration into the actual final products? Because they're all craft elements crafted. I don't know whether, maybe you've got other multiple craftspeople coming together in the same zone, haven't you,
Hmm?
from different.
Well, I mean, not to be mean to craftspeople, but everyone's a prima donna, and, and of course they are, because they're special and wonderful at what they do.
Yeah.
But you've got that, and then you have to bring them all together, and it's a bit like herding cats,
Yes.
because everyone's jumping off in a different direction, and you have to be very diplomatic and balance, somebody's, often the ego against, being part of a bigger whole and all of that. And,
Yeah.
and anyway, success has many authors and lots of people saying, look at my project. And then again, another loops right back round to validating yourself and, people claiming responsibility for things or whatever it is. And it's a kind of, again, it's a kind of compliment and not, not taking any of that stuff too seriously. And again, I love playing and literally physically manifesting my dreams.
Mm.
So that's something I love doing, and I'm very fortunate that I can do that. And the Turquoise Mountain Foundation, that relationship's been, I've been involved with them since their inception, and I love that relationship, and we'll be looking to do projects again in the future. So, but yeah, that's been a wonderful journey, and it's been an incredible success story under the stewardship initially of Rory Stewart, now Shoshana Stewart,
And
and all the teams, and
and that's so you're basically kind of reinvigorating or rebooting the craft industry in that region post kind of conflict. And then are they establishing a market within their own domestic area as well, or
yeah,
not?
they are. It's limited, of course, because Afghanistan's a very poor country, but there were commissions from diplomatic missions,
Mm.
and there were also the crafts. There's a certain element of tourism coming into Afghanistan
Yeah.
now, and so where do they buy things that are representative of the country, the culture, and so there's product that people can buy, which would vary from a simple piece of cloth to an elaborately carved box, or some people have commissioned doors, and it depends on what they want or how their imagination is. But there's a sort of different levels of objects that can be bought, and well, of course it's not a huge industry, but I think that Afghanistan will, as their infrastructure is improved, I believe they'll become quite a strong tourism economy there, because
Working
it's
on
such.
this level. I've been doing a few trips to Sri Lanka over the last few years, and at the start of it, we were just coming out of the economic crisis. They essentially were not able to import anything, so lots of the designers there were turning to the local crafts
Mhm.
to say, well, what? How can we create the spaces without having to buy stuff from abroad? And that's reinvigorated a lot of the interior craftsmanship and the application of that to modern or more contemporary spaces. I think it's really fascinating, that mix of the old and the new.
Yeah, I love Sri Lanka. I got to know Sri Lanka a little bit. It started about 3 years ago, and I went there because it was cheap to go there at first
Yeah.
because of all the troubles that had been there. And then I got to know it a little bit, and it's got them. It's the most extraordinary, wonderful place to be, and I think their tourism sector is sort of booming now. They
Yeah, I heard it's the number one s- kind of spot for UK travelers.
Right. Well, it's interesting because
Yeah,
it's I used to describe it as it's India without the population.
yeah,
So it's all that, there's not, it's not a crowded place. I think the whole population of the entire island is about 5 million or something, but
yeah,
it still has all the wonderful history, and it's a beautiful place. And if you're a surfer, you go down to Wollongama or Hangama or
yeah, yeah,
Galle, those
yeah.
places, and then you can go in country to see the tea plantations. And there's very much a big culture of Ayurvedic and medicine and wellness there,
Yeah.
and it's a good place to go for your mental health. I can tell
Yeah.
you that. So,
I'm going there next week. I'm going to teach,
amazing.
so don't get quite as much mental health opportunities. But yeah, it's I think those relationship. Well, just understanding how the craftspeople work. To what extent were you allowing them to express their own skill and style and outcome?
It was a very strict, it has to be strict detailing because of the nature of the space. It was actually quite an awkward space, and so it needed
Yeah,
proper surveying and things. So from that, the architecture is very precise, and then within that, the carving that are the elements in the architecture. The textiles, I guess, are freer, and
yeah,
the carpets were designs that they were historic designs because of the nature of the project. One of the nice things about the Turquoise Mountain and the City and Guild structure was it teaches them the language of their designs and things from the historical point of view, and then when they graduate they can express themselves in making furniture, modern furniture and contemporary pieces, but they've got the discipline of knowing the history and the tradition.
Okay.
So
Do you think we've lost that in our domestic industry to any extent? What do you do when you're looking for the equivalent craftspeople in the UK? Have,
they,
are there
they
enough?
exist, but it's very few and far between. There's a York is very good for restoration and skills for training people in certain things, and there are certain schools. There are private furniture makers and things that, but yeah, this they're becoming it is at risk, certainly, that. And I always support artisans in a project. For me, the great joy is, working with a bespoke plaster worker or a wood carver, or some element within the room will be completely bespoke or
Yeah.
made to measure. And so embroidery, that sort of thing. But, again, a great sadness of leaving Europe was I saw Europe as one big country.
Mm.
And of course, in certain parts of that big country, people are good at certain things. So, Portugal was very good for lighting, is very good for lighting and certain textiles. France is good for wonderful textiles. In Italy's good for furniture.
Yeah.
It's all part of that. And now there's this layer of bureaucracy and cost that's been inserted, which slows up business. And it's not very, you're not allowed to talk about it. It's the sort of, but it's true. I mean, for me, that whole accessibility to all these wonderful skills and things was the most amazing benefit of being part of that structure.
Yeah, I would have to
Uh,
agree with that sort of thing. I think we work with a company that do a lot of furniture supply, and Europe, Eastern Europe, Portugal, Italy was quite a lot of the products that we were drawing on, as well as UK and further afield. But that whole element was just thrown into chaos, overnight almost. So,
yeah, and it's just brought in all the middlemen who add no value.
exactly. Yeah.
So, and it's ridiculous. It's a sort of awful, it's making money for doing nothing,
Mm.
and which I despise. So.
Well, I mean, the political debate, I know we're getting back onto politics here, aren't we? But the benefits of closing down the borders compared with the benefits of free trade,
Yeah, the
well,
best thing, having a free market. If you're good, people will buy what you do. If you're not,
yeah,
they won't.
yeah,
End of story. It doesn't need to have any discussion, and it doesn't need to be populist or any of that stuff. And
yeah.
here we are in a period of instability, and we need the relationships and the friendships and the connections and all of that. And those are formed through working with artisans and having personal relationships. When I worked on this boat project, which was built in England, we had specific furniture makers in Italy and in France, and I forged relationships with people. There were, people that had wonderful skill sets which didn't exist here but existed there, and then they were combined together here to build something which was the end product. So yeah, anyway,
Do you enjoy that element of pulling everything together then in a
yeah,
project?
yeah, I think that's why I ended up in somewhere called Conduit Street, because you become this channel to make things come together. And so that's a big part of it, and the education too. I love the education side. So
You talked a lot about manifestation earlier,
Mhm.
obviously. What are you manifesting for the next 5 to 10 years then for your business?
Well, there's two enormous speculative projects which I can't talk about at the moment.
Okay.
One is a project which is a heritage building that's to be rebuilt from scratch.
Yeah.
The other is something which has got a maritime connection. So, and then I'm working on a animation project, a film about appreciation. That's very much part of my philosophy for work and business, and encouraging positive relationships with people. So yeah, my projects, I'm lucky that we're small enough that we have a few projects that we work on, and I can within reason choose where I want to work and where I don't want to work. And I always focus on where I want to do or what I want to do. I don't talk about I don't want, because I don't want manifest. I always focus on things that I love doing. So anything I love doing, I want to do more of that. These two big projects, when I can tell you about them, I'll tell you about them. I think, I'm lucky I love what I do. And I think, a lot of people sacrifice that to do something I sometimes you think maybe I should have gone into the city, made money, and then retire. But I love that. I can't imagine retiring because I love what I do. So that's a amazing position to be in. And
Yeah.
so yeah, the,
I'm fascinated by well, you talk about manifestation, and I'm a big fan of that, and gratitude and positivity. It's really refreshing to hear that approach, and you talking really openly about it, because sometimes people think, "What are you talking about?"
well,
Manifestation, but
I can tell you examples in my career. The first museum exhibition I ever designed was at the Louvre. I'd never designed an exhibition in my life before, but I was thinking about this project and I think, yeah, I want to do this.
yeah.
And everything aligned to make it happen. And it happened. And I think when you're the wrong energy about these things, so people talk about a lot of things happening, manifesting things. The wrong energy is that I grabbing at something, grasping at something is totally the wrong energy, and you're chasing your tail. If you talk in terms of I would love it if, wouldn't it be wonderful if, I would really enjoy this. And it's about entertainment to a certain extent and loving and enjoying what you do,
Mm.
then things align and things manifest.
Yeah.
And that's how it works, I found. And you meet the most, for me, it's also the people. One of the, I met Oliver Sacks because of the client that I was working with, who was his niece. And this amazing mind that sort of taught me about gratitude. And here was I suddenly, I didn't come from anything particularly special, but meeting these amazing characters. And I think the work that I do allows me access to certain things and experiences. And that could be the most amazing plumber in the world, or it may be a head of state.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter which. And sometimes you want to spend time with the plumber because they make you laugh, and sometimes you want to spend time with someone that you're learning from who's achieved greatness in their life. And so yeah, I always approaching something with joy and appreciation, and that to me is the most important philosophy. So
That's very responsible. Well, you're not moving, are you?
actually, and I've got a faded t-shirt. I might go and put my sweater on. Hang on one second, which is
That's
in the
fine.
back of the car. One second.
Just going on the thumbnail, but
Right, I'm back. Okay, so
there, perfect.
done my
Well,
hair and makeup now. So
yes, don't worry. I did once have a podcast where the lady said, "I've had my hair done specially," and I thought that's interesting. I think I thought it was a good idea. She felt good, but it was obviously just audio. We don't.
yeah,
But
you had a face for radio.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So any of it, what I'll do is I'll just screen grab a section from this bit of. If we're smiling is quite good actually. I quite like
That
this
usually
smile.
helps.
Yeah. So that'll be, yeah, there's enough there. So you can.
Okay,
But thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate
see you
that. And that's a really interesting story. I mean, I knew it was going to be interesting, but actually talking to you is just next level. Thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate it. And I'm off to Sri Lanka next week, so and I've just
then. Amazing.
finished a series of last series, so I'm going to stack yours up for next series, which I'm hoping to start
Right,
publishing when I get back. But
right. Where in Sri Lanka are you going to be?
going to be in Colombo. But the university I'm teaching at is just outside Colombo in a place called Homagama, which is sort of west, about an hour's
Right.
drive from the city centre.
Okay. Cool.
And then I think we're going up for the weekend. My partner Monica's coming, so we're going up to Ella in the
Okay.
mountains for a couple of days in the weekend in
Do you
between.
ever go down to Wollongama or Hangama or Gaul or any of those
We've been
places?
down to Gaul and we went round last year to Tangal
Right.
on
Okay.
the coast there. Been up to
I
Can.
had a
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I had the most extraordinary experience. I was on my own. I'd come out of a 9-year relationship, and I went to this Ayurvedic retreat place, which was very cheap because bombings had happened the year before and
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
And various things happened, but I was on the beach on my own, And this lady came over and she said, "I've been watching you for the past 5 days." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "My husband and I are having a small party for New Year's Eve. Would you like to come?" And I thought, I said, "Who is this woman?" Anyway, she writes down this phone number and she said, "If you text me, I'll text you my details." So anyway, this comes New Year's Eve, and I had a friend of mine was in town. This friend of mine from America was passing through. So I said, "We've been invited. Well, I've been invited, and you're my plus one, going to this party." And so this woman texts this address, and get in a taxi and go there. And there is this hillside with a road sort of sweeping up with torches either side of it, tiki torches, Americans call them, but they're all those torches. And the taxis dropped us, and these black tuk-tuks were doing a shuttle service up and down the hill
Wow.
to this white Jeffrey Bower 50s modernist house on a
Yeah.
hillside.
Yeah.
It was overlooking the ocean. And this woman turned out to be the Raj Master of somewhere. I don't know where she was from. And I didn't see her much. I mean, she was in the party, but there were 500 guests from all over the place. There were two dance floors, like DJs.
Yeah.
This,
Amazing.
this sort of, they're completely mad in the middle of Sri Lanka, and on the coast in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
And then I met this sort of Qatari princeling, and then these Irish people who restored houses in Dublin, and real mixed bag of characters. And there were fireworks at midnight, and then we saw the sunrise over the Indian Ocean, and it was just like extraordinary. And I don't think if I'd been traveling with someone that would have happened to me. It sort of just was
Yeah.
this extraordinary thing. But it was a fascinating, that I was the last thing I was expecting in Sri Lanka. But Sri Lanka was a joyful place for me, so I was
It's
very
a
happy.
beautiful place, and the people are so lovely as well, I find. And yeah, yeah. I'm
Uh,
teaching there for 2 weeks, so it's
Nice.
it's great actually. I mean, it's not a proper holiday, but it feels like a holiday.
Well, it's a change, so
Yeah.
there you go. And it's a nice place to be. And if you will, you be able to do anything like go and do some yoga or whatever?
Yeah, we've got a sort of long weekend in the middle, so planning to do
Mhm.
that. We've managed to go and see a few places over the last 2 years we've been doing it, and so a bit more of that. I'd
Yeah.
like the proper full-on yoga retreat, but I just don't have enough time.
No, it's funny. And also those things, I went to this Ayurvedic place and I didn't know anything about it until 15 days before I went.
Yeah,
And I went there and it was full of Germans, Swiss Germans and Austrians.
yeah.
You can imagine. And so on Christmas Eve, one of them said, "We're going to bed now because we have to be up at 3:30 for sunrise yoga." And I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
This was,
So,
yeah,
anyway, but there was this very strict discipline mornings, and then you had the afternoons off.
yeah.
But I kind of rebelled and didn't go to all of the things.
I think I'd quite appreciate that, but I'd like to have a nice beer at,
Yeah, yeah,
some
exactly.
town.
No, it was all of that. So anyway, but
Yes. Oh well.
right,
But
well,
I'll see what I can manifest.
see what comes up. Yeah, well, I mean, if you, I met a really nice man in Colombo who made saris, modern fabric designer, and then there's that company that does all the smells and soaps and things, which seems to be all over the place.
Oh,
And
yeah, really cool.
yes, them, and
I
and
can't
then
find
there's this
that. Yeah.
near the Face Hotel. There was a craft market.
Oh yeah, been there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so and to the various things going on, but
Yeah.
anyway, yeah,
Well, the only danger with my existence is I go from a five-star hotel into a cab, go to work, sit in an air-conditioned lecture hall, come back to my five-star hotel and do the same thing the next day, every day.
yeah,
So that's why I take a few days off in the middle. But
yeah,
um,
no, definitely. And yeah, go on. So, have you been to the Jeffrey Bower Museum?
yes, well,
Right,
I've been to his house in
in Colombo,
oh no, yes, I went there last time actually. Yes, and then they took me down to his house in
the estate that's outside
State.
Colombo.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. No, I've never been to that, but I went to the one in Colombo, and there was an American lady. The guy who inherited it, I think, was the houseboy,
Hmm.
and he was giving the tour. He'd been Jeffrey's friend, and and so this American lady said, "What does it used to do for Jeffrey?" And I was like, "You don't want to know what he did for Jeffrey."
Yes. Yeah.
What do you do for Jeffrey? Well, he left you the house. Why did he leave you the house? What do you think?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, okay. All right. Well, lovely to meet you.
And you, yeah,
Yeah, I always, I mean, we sort of steered along a sort of, I also appreciate we didn't really talk about dates and things because everyone always tries to pigeonhole you into periods and things. So,
yeah,
which is always a sort of, but yeah, they say, what happened at this date? And I always think life is this sort of multiple, I mean, this is getting into a different weird area for me, multiple dimensional realities. And you literally slip into different places, and sometimes time speeds up and sometimes it slows down. And you ever had an experience when you go back to a place and someone hasn't aged? Have you ever had that? Or you meet somebody that seems that they're timeless.
see, yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
And then sometimes you come there and they have aged, like people that like and I think it's a lot to do with how we perceive space. Like when I work, I don't particularly like working in Italy where I am at the moment, and the time goes by really fast because I kind of make it go past fast.
yeah, yeah.
and, and then when you do enjoy it, so I mean, often I'll, I just feel like things that you appreciate happen seem to be longer time frames. Anyway, I don't know. But,
I think it's a lot to do with, whether you're happy and comfortable in an environment as well.
yeah, true.
Your level of
And
enjoyment, things. I don't know. Yeah.
so,
Interesting.
okay. Well, enjoy your trip.
Thank you very
And,
much. I'll
okay.
keep in touch on when we're going to publish,
Okay.
and I'll just lean back into more manifestation because inspired by the success you're having, I think I need to revisit my manifestation goals.
Well, it's just it's a gentle energy. It's not
Yeah,
that's how it's happened for me and the
yeah.
way I do things. So, but yeah, and things will happen. Like I'll tell you the last story, but I was doing a project where I was trying to save the local cinema, my local cinema, and I got it into my head I had to meet Cameron McIntosh so that it could be a theatre as well. And on that was on the Friday, and I was thinking about Cameron McIntosh, and I had to get on a flight to Bordeaux on the Monday, and I always sit in the same seat, and the aircraft wouldn't let me book that seat. And I was really pissed because I always like being in an aisle so I can get out. I get a bit claustrophobia and all that. And it forced me into a window seat. And when I got on board, there was someone sitting in my seat. They said it wouldn't let me book the window. And I was like, what? And I said, no, you stay in the window and I'll sit in the aisle. I'm fine with that. Anyway, I opened the overhead locker and there was a suitcase in there and it had this very smart name on it. And it said Michael Lepore Trench. And I thought, God, that's a weird name. So I Googled it when I sat down and I looked at it and guess who it was?
Cameron McIntosh then.
Cameron McIntosh's boyfriend, partner. And and I thought, how am I going to get the conversation going to get him?
Get it right.
Well,
Yeah.
I got him round to talking about Cameron McIntosh, and then that following week on the Friday, I was in front of him in their apartment.
Wow.
So,
You're obviously very skilled at this. You've been honing your technique of
well, I
manifesting.
didn't, I don't know how that happened, but that was pretty fucking random.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but it was yeah. Anyway, so weird things do happen sometimes. So
Well, I'll put some effort into it, and then I'll let you know next time we speak on what I've
okay,
managed to manifest.
cool. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Well, enjoy the
Lovely to
trip.
meet you, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you so much for the time. And yeah, I'll keep you posted on when we. It'll probably be in about a month's time at the earliest, I think. Which
Okay, oh, for sure. I don't think it's particularly time sensitive. So
no, not really. No.
okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right,
Awesome.
great.
Great.
Thank you. Okay,
Thanks a lot then. Take
bye
care.
bye. You
Bye.
too. Bye bye. Bye bye.